let us dive into our watching brief and begin with, I suppose, an update on the HS2 High-Speed 2 railway link that's been touted for many years now, better part of a decade at least, as a much needed connection between the south and eventually, some people suggest, the north of England as well, although there are debates on where exactly the north is, it seems. In terms of anyway, living in the actual north of England, I'm afraid Leeds doesn't quite cut it, but nonetheless, I'll put that to one side.
Not to mention South Shields. I think you still use Stephenson's rocket up there, don't you?
Well, more or less, yes, and and we like a good stotty. Look it up. But the HS2 is a project, it's a railway project that's been very much seen as not only a civil engineering boon and boost, as it were, for the economy, but also something that archaeologists are very much relying on and have been relying on as the golden goose on the horizon, something that's going to see archaeology, according to some, experience a new golden age of excavation. And it's been announced recently that the cost has spiralled yet again. It's gone up by £22 billion to an estimated £88 billion now. And it started at an official cost of £55.7 billion back in 2015. So we've added almost 40–50% onto the cost now. And I can't help but wonder what this means, especially in the near future, as maybe budgets get squeezed as we leave Europe. I wonder
if we leave
Europe. I wonder how long HS2 is going to be able to survive a cynical cost efficiency exercise. So that is the news story in a nutshell. That's basically where we're at. Nothing conclusive in terms of the future of the project has been said, although this has led to calls for a final go or no go on this by the end of the year. So government will be looking into whether HS2 has legs and a future, whether actually it's the best way to spend this money in terms of the health of things like, say, internet infrastructure versus physical infrastructure. Does it really make sense to shave 19 minutes off a journey to London in this day and age? So there's that's in the air, and ultimately I'm highlighting this because I'm concerned about the effect on archaeology and archaeologists. I have friends, colleagues, and also we know from very public articles how archaeologists have been encouraged to get involved in this project, units as well, in what's been dubbed the biggest archaeological excavation in Europe of its kind. And if this doesn't go ahead, it will have an impact on archaeology. So at some point in the near future, we're thinking of looking into that in some way, but watch this space, I suppose, for the HS2 project, and also how, again, specifically how it relates to archaeology and the health of the sector, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we should make clear for people who haven't been following the story really closely,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of archaeology work has already been done, and it's the kind of massive infrastructure project that really began with the Heathrow terminals in the early 90s. I think it was Terminal 4, wasn't it? Terminal 5,
Mm-hmm.
Where the work was too extensive for a single contracting unit to take it on.
Yeah.
So it was consortiums of units came together to put dozens of archaeologists onto a site
Mm-hmm.
under one umbrella management and do the work under planning as a planning condition.
Yeah.
And you had, certainly in the case of Heathrow, I remember when that contract came through, and it was very exciting because people there you had a developer who said, we want state-of-the-art work. We want this to be a showpiece as part of the project, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing's happened with HS2. There's been a lot of public sharing of work. People might remember the work at the cemetery outside King's Cross. Euston.
Yep.
I think it was it Matthew Flinders, the explorer of Australia. His coffin was found. He was known to have been buried in that particular graveyard that was going to be impacted by HS2.
Yeah.
And that was a big news story.
Yeah.
There have been other news stories in Birmingham and so on. So the first part of HS2, a lot of the work's already been done.
Yeah.
What we're talking about really is the pipeline of work going forward certainly into the next decade, well into the next decade.
But also it's probably also worthwhile saying that actually it's being done, and it makes sense that it's done somewhat sequentially. So we have
Yes,
ahead of survey work, you have an element of archaeological survey, seeing
indeed.
what's in the ground, and that means initially things like access to private land is necessary. There's
That's right.
negotiations about the expenditure on the value of land and properties that are on the route. And in particular, I have friends and colleagues who are involved in that at the moment, actually, where
Mm,
even now, even at this early stage in the lifetime of that section of the track, there are sometimes issues. Landowners don't necessarily feel as though they're being compensated properly for
absolutely.
this in this project. So even on a day-to-day expression of the project, costs are going up every day when someone, say, let's say, for example, blocks access for a Land Rover with a tree trunk. um, so
Hypothetically,
hypothetically. And what this means is that, of course, the costs are going to go up
yeah,
because of these sorts of day-to-day problems. But the thing is, this is such a big jump, and archaeologists for such a long time, especially people higher up in places like Historic England, in government liaison positions, this kind of thing, have been saying that this is going to be so important for archaeology. To a certain extent, it feels at this point like it can't fail on the current trajectory that archaeology is on in Britain.
there,
And if
yeah.
it does,
Unfortunately,
there'll be some questions to be
yeah.
asked about career paths.
Unfortunately, that overlooks something called the I think it's the sink costs paradox,
Mm.
which is there is a some people would argue, yeah, too big to fail, too much money has been spent already. But under that particular idea in economics, it is actually cheaper in the end to cancel than to carry on.
Oh no, sorry. I should be clear. I mean, too big to fail for archaeology. It's what I
Yeah,
mean.
right, right. Okay,
It's not as though
understood.
the people holding the purse strings care about that.
No, no,
But
but more than anything, Mark, I think we need to put this in the current political context.
mhm,
Um, I mean, we're recording this on the day that the UK Chancellor Sajid Javid is giving his spending review,
mm,
assuming things in Westminster don't go completely belly up. And that is slated to promise. Okay, it's a government promise, so it means nothing,
mhm,
particularly under the current Prime Minister, allegedly. But that the he's promising things, big money to frontline services like social care, like education, like the
mhm,
police,
mhm,
things that win you elections.
mhm,
And HS2 will not win anybody elections. And in fact, in the Midlands, where there are a lot of Conservative rural seats, which HS2 is slamming through, it could actually lose seats.
yes,
Um, and it has never been publicly popular. It was driven from the top, began under the Blair government and the Brown government, and was carried on by Cameron and has been carried on by successively under May. What Boris Johnson, the current UK Prime Minister, has done is say that there'll be a review of HS2 because of these spiralling costs. And we should also say the delay. It was meant to the line was meant to carry its first passengers by the mid 2020s. It's now not slated to open until 2031.
yeah.
So there's around 12 years before there's any benefit to the economy from this massive investment.
Yeah.
Um, and
So on the one hand, if it continues, arguably there's a good decade of work there for archaeology. But the more this sort of thing happens, the more risky it is.
And what Johnson has done is partly it's short-term tactics, partly it's longer-term.
Mm-hmm.
Short-term tactic is to say to maybe disgruntled Conservative voters in the Midlands, if there is a general election and there's a general consensus, we'll have a general election in the UK before Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
Possibly even as soon as next month.
Mm-hmm.
That Conservative candidates in seats that HS2 is going to be lambing through and say, it might not happen. The government might yet cancel it. In fact, I don't support it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he keeps it. He neutralises it as an election issue for opposition parties. The longer term issue is the cost.
Hmm.
If he's going to put a lot of money into social care and education and the police, as he's promised, and other things, he needs to get the money from somewhere.
Hmm.
Now, if Brexit happens in whatever form it happens, certainly a no-deal Brexit, and under all the other models, even a Brexit with a deal, the economy
the better
tanks
part of
to a degree.
the better part of 88 billion pounds suddenly looks very tempting to do a raid on.
The better part of 88
Mm.
million pounds
Mm.
in the Chancellor's piggy bank
Mhm.
could be very useful indeed.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is also worth noting that the person who has been put in charge of the government review of the it's only the, I should say it's only the latest government review, but the review that's been instituted by Transport Secretary Grant Shapps under a man called Douglas Oakervie. Oakervie is a known sceptic
Hmm.
of HS2.
Hmm.
So there's a suggestion that the dice are being loaded.
No, exactly. So, crucially, we got a bit heavy on the political geekery there, I think. But nonetheless, crucially, the details basically translate to this question of whether this will happen. At the moment, is it expedient economically, politically, and for various other reasons for this to continue? And as I say, crucially, from my perspective, what this says and means for the immediate future of archaeology in this country. The archaeological establishment have been betting a lot on this project going forward, and I'm definitely keeping a close eye on it. And if it does fall through, I will absolutely want to know what happens next and what this means for actually establishing. And this is something that I've touched on in previous watching briefs, establishing a more sustainable career path for archaeologists. Instead of relying on the whims of civil engineering projects or the boom and bust of the building industry, maybe there are other ways of doing this. But that's a conversation for another day, I think.
As is the conversation about that other big infrastructure project, the A303 extension and the Stonehenge Tunnel, which is currently undergoing a planning inquiry in Wiltshire. And again, that is another politically highly sensitive project where if it goes ahead, there will be a lot of archaeology involved, but there are political elephant traps and economic elephant traps there, which the government may choose to avoid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It might be easier just not to do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's HS2.